equals at root dot find name m. And then we can say, yeah, good enough. And then we can change this to simply say at root.message. So now our code is a lot more expressive. We're not having to deal with the whole find name and passing in strings. We can do dot syntax to just access our app. And this becomes really powerful for things like JSON access or XML access, where instead of having to do all of these element searches, we can just use dot notation to work through whatever it is that we're doing. Come back. There you go. So last is dynamism. So whenever we take all of these things, we take duck typing, we take the ability to do all of these interesting metaprogramming topics, we start being able to create some very interesting dynamic classes. So let me open up this greeters class here. And if you see, we have two methods, or this method called greet and make greeting. And what we're doing here is creating class methods on the fly in our classes. And so if we look down a little further, here in our person class, we're saying greet in French is bonjour, and greet in Spanish is hola, and we're defining new methods that are in our class. So you see here, down here at the bottom, we just say person.greet in French, and it just works. So I say greeters, and it just works, just like that. And that's because of a lot of the metaprogramming. So here we're saying singleton class eval, define a new method, and we're passing that in as a string. So greet in whatever language was passed in, and then we've got a block that executes the code of whatever was passed in there. And so if we look at the methods of the person class after we've run that, suddenly we have 4 new methods that are added. And so that's all well and good. And let's see if we have the sound on. We do. So at breakfast this morning, samples IronRuby, I ran into the guys on the Microsoft Translator team. And they were talking about the Bing Translator APIs, which are pretty interesting. And so I modified this sample, the make greeting, to add a bunch of nasty-looking code. But effectively, it's the same thing, but what we're going to do is speak the greeting as opposed to just being boring and typing it out. So if I say greet voice, it should go.
Bonjour.
And it did that by accessing .NET classes. So here we're saying we're defining a path. We're calling system URI new, web client new, and client download data completed. So now we're attaching event handlers. And we're calling download data async. All of these things that we're calling here are .NET classes, .NET methods. And Ruby translates them back to the more familiar syntax for the .NET developers. And then what we're doing whenever that download completes is we're writing it out to a file in a binary way. And we're simply executing using system diagnostics process start info. Yes, I am calling process start info and process start on a Mac in Mono. And to execute AF play of the resulting wave that comes out of it. So pretty interesting things that we can start doing with Ruby and allowing our code to be able to write some quick, fun kind of demos. OK, so the last interesting thing about Ruby, well, not the last interesting thing, but is RubyGems. So RubyGems are a standardized packaging system for hosting packages. So if you write some snippet of functionality that a lot of people want to use, you can, or that maybe only you want to use, but you want to be able to access it in a standardized way, you can package as a gem. So gems are a standardized packaging system. It's a central repository for hosting these gems, and then anybody can turn around and pull it down. And the important thing, it allows for management of multiple installed versions. So most anything that we do in Ruby, whether that's Rails, whether that's Rake, whether that's accessing HTTP classes, almost everything is we pull down the Ruby library, and then we're able to do gem installs. Now, the lucky thing you have from IronRuby is that you're not only getting access to most of the Ruby classes, you're also getting access to a lot of the .NET framework that's there, and that's pretty powerful. So with RubyGems, literally it's just gem install and HTTP party. HTTP party is a phenomenally fun gem to use. And then that's it. And it's installed, and you turn around and start using it. And this resolves any dependencies that your gem has. So if you're using other gems, it'll pull all of those in. It'll do the installation and configuration right there for you. OK, so enough about Ruby. All of that, almost everything we've showed before, except for obviously the .NET runtime, is all compatible across Ruby. So what about IronRuby? So let's look at the basics. Installing IronRuby, you go to ironruby.net/download. You download the Windows installer, unless you have a Mac, and you profit. And that's it. And you have it installed, and you're able to turn around and start running IRB or any of the Ruby code. You can execute it right there with IronRuby. So what happens when we install that? So let's very, very quickly take a whirlwind tour of what it looks like. So this is release candidate 2. So we have a bin directory, which includes some DLLs. So the IronRuby libraries, YAML DLL, the dynamic DLL, and the scripting DLLs. And then we have a bunch of various programs. So we have iGem, which is our Ruby gem. We have IR, which is the Ruby interpreter. We have IRB, which is the interactive Ruby interpreter. Rackup, which allows you to run Ruby on Rails on IIS. Rails, which is our Rails command. Rake, which is the Rake command, so on and so forth. So all of that comes right there as part of the bin directory. In the lib directory, we just have some classes. So within the Ruby directory, that's our standard Ruby library. But in IronRuby, it's very interesting. So you'll see here we have a lot of .rb files, but some of them look familiar, like presentationcore.ruby. Wouldn't it be awesome if we could just say presentationcore.ruby and get access to whatever they've written for presentation core? But what this actually does is it's a shortcut for including libraries. So anytime you require or you use .NET libraries as a part of your application, you need to include the full strong named, if you're using a strong name assembly, obviously, you have to do the full strong name. So what the IronRuby team has done here was create shortcuts. So all I have to do is say require presentation core, and this Ruby file turns around and requires the whole strong name, so I'm not constantly having to type all of this out. So thanks, guys. That was a brilliant move. And lastly, inside of the IronRuby install is Silverlight. So this is the Silverlight dynamic SDK, and this is what allows Python or Ruby to run or allows you to write Silverlight code behinds in IronPython or IronRuby. So we have the bin directory, which has all of our DLLs as part of it. We have the script directory, which has the two main things here are CHR and SL. CHR is if you've done Silverlight at all, it's the Chiron. It starts up a web server. It automatically creates a zap file for you and deploys it. And SL generates that Silverlight, it's almost like a Rails command for Silverlight, and it creates a standardized kind of layout for a Silverlight application. So that's the whirlwind tour through it. Yes, all those things are great. Yes, and the samples, because the samples are very cool. So how did it do that? So what happened whenever we ran these examples that turned around and accessed the DLR, the CLR objects? How does it work? So we already looked at the DLR and the common hosting model, the runtime, the language implementation.